Welcome to the Reminger Report podcast on emerging technologies. Reminger LPA is a full-service law firm with over 150 attorneys across 15 offices serving the Midwest. Join your hosts, Zachary Pyers and Kenton Steele, both partners in Reminger's Columbus, Ohio office as they interview entrepreneurs, practitioners, and thought leaders. Together, they explore how emerging technologies and evolving business models impact our daily lives, and how the law is adapting to these changes. Let's dive into today's conversation and continue exploring transformation.
Now, I will tell you that we've talked, not just me, but the industry in general has talked a lot about how this is going to affect or change the way we practice law. And I know a lot of organizations are going through this, not just legal organizations, but a lot of other,
Everything. Yeah.
From doctors, accountants, especially with professionals, and I think of them, and I don't mean to, but professionals sometimes tend to be very protective, and especially do not like change because they don't want anything that may affect or hurt the way that they earn money.
Yeah, totally.
There's lots of professions that are
You
like
pick
that.
the industry. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, absolutely. And so as I think about this, I I will tell you candidly, I've got some concerns for the industry. Not so much that I'm afraid that I'm going to be out of work and that
Mhm.
AI is going to replace all lawyers, because I just don't
It's
see
not
that
going to
happening.
happen. It's not
But
capable of original thought.
right. And so I do see, right, that as a lawyer, I'm still probably going to be employed in the next 10 years. But I do think that there's probably going to be some changes to how things are done and how things, and so as we kind of wrestle with some of these changes and or downside, kind of how does the legal industry take full advantage of this by and still kind of minimize the negative effects that may come about?
hmm makes sense. So I have some thoughts. I made a couple notes. I'll go through it. I think,
Yeah.
first is this change is going to happen, right? So let's start a culture of innovation versus just hoping that it doesn't change, right? I think that's the first step is that to accept that change is coming. And let's have a culture of innovation, which in particular, and again, I know people at really, 3,000 law firms, you know, innovation in law firms, as far as how they internally operate, usually aren't two words that go together that
Uh,
frequently.
that is correct.
And so I think that's the first part is I think you need to say like, this is coming. We need to first start having a culture of innovation. So we start looking at how can we improve our business? And it could be even start off with your back office. Like how can we just deliver high quality service to our clients faster, which in essence should increase your gross margins in the near term, right? But it also gives you a competitive moat if suddenly you have pressure on your margins later. So I think culture of innovation is first. The next part is a lot of times people, when they get excited about change, they jump into it, the deep end first. I always say, don't do that. Pick something small but strategic. So, like, I'll give you a simple example. Maybe you're a 2,000 firm law firm. This happens all the time. I need specialists for this particular case that are licensed in this particular state. You've probably got it on, somewhere in your internet usually, or sometimes I've literally heard law firms where there's like two people in the firm that just seem to know everything that everybody goes to. Like, who's good at that, right? So that might be a very simple thing is like, let's just digitize our skill sets so that we can quickly deploy the right skill sets to the problem. As an example of something very simple but strategic to start with, right? So you get the right people, so you deliver the best quality service as quickly as possible. Upskill your teams. Like for example, if a lawyer hasn't got used to the term of writing prompts, like some lawyers haven't even used ChatGPT or Claude or anything like that, if they just start using it themselves, they will save a ton of their own time, right? So, but how do you teach people like, here's how it works, and here's how you can do it, and here's how I can help you, and here's how you could load in like four different legal documents and ask it to cross-reference and check these things that you might have had to do manually before,
Sure.
if that makes sense. So again, culture of innovation, small but strategic start, upskill your team. Sometimes there's legal tech providers that might help you. Um, I think ethical and risk frameworks can be important because the other part is putting all this data. That's your secret sauce. So security and compliance, you already have that to a large extent, but you need to make sure that you really emphasize that and who has access to this. Because now it's really easy for someone, whoever has access to this, it's a very powerful tool. So you want to make sure it's very secure. And then the last part is I always say is if you think about it, like if you have a firm and you map, I just got a client to all the things I do with the client in that full life cycle. You think about it, the different types of clients, map the life cycle, and think about the internal processes of how it works today. And then with that kind of mapping, because a lot of times people haven't even thought about like all these parts that are very manual, and this goes here and that goes there. Um, Map it and then look at what can we use AI and this new approach to automate it or drive more efficiency in those processes.
So I think that a lot, I think that makes sense. And so I will tell you that at least, as I sit here today, I see a lot of well, I sit on a handful of kind of industry groups, right, where I meet with other lawyers in Ohio and across the country. And I'm surprised that a lot of what I would consider to be mid to large, not the huge firms, but the kind of the 50 to 250 lawyer firms, a lot of them still are not necessarily using AI in a lot of different areas. I mean, they're hardly using it at all.
Right.
And there are some legal service tech providers. I think the big, and I won't name names, but I will say there's two, at least two huge ones that have been around forever, and give free access to kids and adults in law school to kind
Mhm.
of lure them into using their products post graduation. They've started to use it for a little bit of drafting work, a lot of research, right? Where they've started to kind of improve their research models. And it occurred to me as you said that the prompt writing, because when it comes to some of this stuff, especially the research, the prompt writing becomes so crucial.
Yep.
And if you use it like you would use a traditional legal research platform, you're not going to get the same results,
Correct.
and you're not going to get the best results. And so there is a lot of that in there. So it seems to me that a lot of firms, as they're dipping their toes in, are dipping them in these commercially available research kind of platforms because it's the easy one.
Mhm.
But as you know, you and I have talked. I mean, I can't help but think about my back office as you've mentioned, because I'm like, oh, is our back office using this? I don't even know, because I mean, I have very limited interaction with our back office. I kind of separated. I have people, and all I know is that they send my bills out in time and tell me when a client hasn't promptly paid them.
Right.
Um, but I start to think about this, and I'm like, oh yeah, like this could be a real area of strategic use in that kind of framework that could make them significantly more efficient in a lot of things. I even think of like I manually review all my bills, and I'm starting to think, is there a better way to do this now? Is there a way that AI could flag bills for me that are problematic or entries that need to be adjusted or changed because client guidelines won't pay for it, or
Mhm.
there's an error in a misspelling, or there is another, let's say there's just an incomplete statement. It says correspondence from and it's blank.
Right.
Could it help me rather than me spending an hour or two every month flipping page by page through a bill to make sure that it reads correctly? Could it help me with this process?
Yeah, and I think that's a really great question. And one of the things that, like, again, I'll go back to when I do some work with private equity companies and we try to AIify their business. One of the, there's certain areas, like, for example, we know if we get developers to use AI to build software, for every three developers, you get a full extra developer of velocity or capacity. Like the data is pretty clear. And there's other areas of QA and tech, but going back to contract review, there's lots of other areas that a lot of times company haven't thought about it. So what we usually like to say is a great way to start off might be is to get somebody who's tech savvy in your organization, who's really passionate about it and can kind of talk about the capabilities and demonstrate it to the team, and then do something like a contest internally. Hey, everybody's in their thing. We're going to have a contest who's got the best idea of something that we could quickly implement that would deliver value. And that way you get the people in the various functions not being afraid of AI. Because a lot of times if it's comes from on high, like, oh, what does that mean? But if you feel like you're part of like, hey, this is not something against me, this is something that can help me be more efficient, help our company be more efficient. And it's pretty cool. The company's asking me for the ideas. And then you've got your billing clerks, you've got, maybe your executive assistants, you've got all of them thinking about how they could use it in a, again, small step forward. And we've seen some really, really great things where great ideas that, quote, leadership never even thought of. Once you show the team members the capabilities, they start to come up with really great ideas that you can implement relatively quickly.
Now, I will tell you that there's a number of, at least, I don't want to say struggles, but people are predicting a number of challenges, I will say, with AI and the use in the legal industry, as well as a whole host of other industries and professions. One of the things that I have heard or I have seen talked about is training young lawyers. And I will tell you that, and I see this kind of, and I don't want to say that I'm in the middle, but I kind of see this from both angles in that I see young lawyers who may not get the traditional training that I had, because the tools are just different now. And some of the stuff that I did, like for example, when I first started out, I had a partner that I worked with, and I did a deposition summary of every single deposition he took. So I was handed, after the deposition transcript would come in, he would hand it to me and I would review it and I would create a page by page summary of everything that the person testified to. Now, I already know that that task is being replaced by AI because I've used it. I've uploaded deposition transcripts and said, please summarize this on a page by page. And in very short time, you're looking at a 200-page deposition, which would have probably taken me 3 hours-ish, maybe four, to create the summary for. It's shooting it out in 3 to 4 minutes. And so, but so that task may be replaced, which is helpful and efficient. But I reviewed so many deposition transcripts within the first year that I was clerking and then year that I was an associate. I probably reviewed 100 transcripts and read them, not just of this lawyer, but of all the depositions he was in. So there were all these other lawyers. And I got a chance to review the questioning styles and tactics that these lawyers used. So I actually had the benefit of essentially sitting through 100 depositions without actually having done it.
Mhm.
Now, as we fast forward through AI, I think to these young lawyers, I'm like, they're not going to see those deposition transcripts because no one's going to pay them to review them and summarize them because we can use a machine to do it. So, and I know that's a very kind of
Mhm.
microscopic aspect of it, but one of the things that I think I worry about is how do we train the younger generation to still practice law, so to say that normal training techniques we were using 10 or 15 years ago aren't going to be there. And how do we make sure that when I retire someday in the next 20 to 30 years, that there's lawyers a generation behind me that are ready to kind of step up and take over?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, I think that's one of the dangers to society with AI in general is if we don't have to think and we could just get the answer immediately,
Uh,
then do our critical thinking skills decrease over time as a culture? And I think that's a very valid question. Like sometimes, like again, I'm a tech guy and I get excited about it, but I think that's very valid because the brain having to do that critical thinking is important. Now, I think the good news is I think we could probably develop ways for people to still get that knowledge because I'm just going back to that scenario and just brainstorming. If one of the things we determined, hey, like let's just say we modeled out how we train and onboard new attorneys is we historically we had them do review depositions and write summaries. We had them do this, we had them do that, we had these other things. Great. So then what I would say is, well, how can we use AI to give them the same learnings? So it could be as simple as like, showing them here's the key patterns of effective questioning and depositions because then it could take through all of that, give it to them, and you could even have AI create scenarios where it could be fully interactive and then score them based upon how they're doing it.
So I'm not going to lie to you. If you can't tell by my face, I'm getting a little excited as you're talking about this because I started thinking, as good as the training that I had was, right, by reading all of these deposition transcripts, based upon what you just said, wouldn't it be even better if I would have been able to interactively train with the AI by doing mock depositions where it continued to change up on me, and I would have to adjust or change my questioning style on the fly with that model in a practice setting, and it saves you all of the quote unquote embarrassment of having to figure it out in the real world. Because I teach a class in depositions at my alma mater, Capital University Law School, and usually what the class focuses on is roughly 50% of me telling them all of the stupid things that I did early in my career
Right.
in hopes that they avoid those mistakes. But I started thinking about it as you were talking, and I thought that's a really good idea. Why are we not using AI to do these mock depositions to help these younger lawyers get trained? Because I certainly think there's a very real possibility for it to do that.
Right. What's great is like you could go back to you could take is who's your best at, let's just say, insurance depositions, right? Because that's where you're looking for little inconsistencies and so forth. And so you could literally then have the AI load that, and you could literally tell the AI you're going to play the person receiving the deposition, and I'm going to be the attorney. And what's crazy, if you notice how good the voice is getting on like
Uh,
Claude, Chat GPT. It's almost conversational, and it's only going to get better. You could literally then just have them say, "Okay, great. Here's a scenario, this case," and it could mimic even a previous case, and they could just go through the deposition, and then it can score them based upon your best attorney's depositions of what they missed, what they forgot to. You can insert, the false narratives. You could even have it run the exact same scenario that actually happened historically, but allow them to live interface and run with it.
yeah, that I mean, this the prospects for using this, I think now, I think that's a really helpful analogy, right? Is when we start talking about the problems of AI, what I heard you say at least, and is you flipped it and say, well, AI's created this problem. How does AI also help us solve this problem?
Right.
And I I don't have good response as to why we're not trying to utilize it that way. I mean, it would make a whole ton of sense to me because one of the problems that I think we've seen in the legal industry in general over the last 5 or 10 years, 20 years, is that there's a lot of things in the legal industry that have changed. Jury trials have gone away where people 20, 30 years ago tried a lot of cases. Now it's like less than 1%. So one of the things people have been talking about for the last decade is how do we get younger lawyers trial experience? And there's really hasn't been a great answer. People have kind of come up with a hodgepodge of ways. Some law firms run a trial academy or a trial institute where they do a mock depo, or I'm sorry, a mock trial, but it's not real. So all of the things or the pressures and the anxiety of being in front of a jury and a judge who may or may not like you, may or may not like your client, some of those are removed. Um, but it occurs to me that we really could start utilizing this really to start trading in a way we just haven't even thought of yet.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that to your point is it's never going to be the same because like it's not going to mimic the pressure of being there and the political dynamics and the socioeconomic and all those kind of things. But it can get them trained up on the practice of what good looks like. And then of
Yeah.
course they're going to have to learn to, and that goes back to kind of internal controls, right? Like how do we show up? That's something that, I think it's a different type of experience. But I think the mechanical part of what's a good questioning and how should you do it and those type of things, I think AI absolutely can power that. And again, going back to how would I go about it is again, all of your processes, including onboarding a new young attorney. What do you have them do and why do you have them do that? And then is there a way that we can get that knowledge even faster and even of a higher quality into them so that they become up to speed? And I think in time, you'll probably see people get smarter. Like, I do think there's a part is the amount of knowledge that's instantly accessible to everybody. You're already, I think we're all in some ways getting smarter because now if we have a question, we get to know it and we get to learn what the answer is in a definitive way. We get to see what's good, what's bad. We get to do reasoning. I think that I think that if you can kind of think about that and reverse engineer each of your processes at the law firm, I think you can give most of that training to them.
One of the things that I think, and I'll just speak in general from the law firms that I'm aware of. I think one thing that I think the law firms are not great about is identifying necessarily the processes. And so sometimes the there are processes, right? And they're just because these organizations have been around for so long, things just happen and nobody knows exactly how or why they happen, but they just kind of happen and everybody knows that they happen. So, but
Mhm.
nobody's actually stopped to think, is this the most efficient or my best way? And are these processes that could be adjusted? I mean, I think that, and I'm kind of zooming back out now, is one of the things that I think is going to be challenging, I think, for a lot of mid to large, but not giant law firms are going to have to start really more closely examining the processes to see how they can best utilize and adapt.
I agree because you don't want to hire a consultant. Obviously, that can do it. But again, I'll go back to a best practice. What I would do is have a working group, like going back to, hey, we're gonna start to embrace a culture of innovation. Company wide, that's what we're going to do. And we're going to start looking at AI as do who's passionate about it. So we've got somebody that's already passionate and can educate our force on the capabilities of it to the best of their knowledge. That's a good start. And then, again, like I said, that the competition or competition in working groups, because the competition may give you the ideas of where you want to focus. And then you could take the working group to then go execute on that change. And again, don't try to bite off the big thing first. What can we do that's small, incremental, and immediately delivers value, which in the near term should increase your gross margins and in the long term protect your gross margins.
So I will confess to you that I actually have to do a presentation in about 2 months on AI and how it's going to impact the legal industry. And I will tell you that I think I've now gotten it's only a 20-minute presentation, but I think I've got about 19 minutes of my material just for my conversation with you here today. Um, and so I will thank you for that. But as we look towards kind of the future, I mean, we've talked a lot about how all of these benefits are going to play out and how it's really going to help us improve. Do you see any downsides? Are there any risks that we should be kind of worried about? And I don't just necessarily even mean the legal profession and the implementation of AI, but just kind of, organizations in general. Is there anything that they should maybe say, hey, let's pause just a second before we move forward with this? Or is there anything along those lines?
Well, I think we'll go do the practical and the ethical. So on the practical side is AI doesn't solve all problems. Right now, as I mentioned before, it's not capable of original thought. There is people that believe they call it AGI, but that it will start to be able to do original thought in somewhere in the 3 to 5 year range. And what does that mean? You and I both don't know. But I think about, you think about humans are a resilient species and we react to change. And this is going to be one of the biggest changes that's happened across all aspects of how we operate in business and life. And so, if you believe that's going to happen, then you have to lean into it so you don't get steamrolled by it. Um, on the ethical side, the part that, like I've got people I know that are in customer service, there's certain job roles where their whole job is to take a set of data, listen to a customer, and then follow a set of rules. Like that's going to be tough because AI is going to be very good at automating those type of roles out of existence. And so, what does that mean? You don't know, I don't know, but it is going to happen. And I'm just a believer that, if you think about all the innovations that have happened, you think the same thing happened when the computer came out, the same thing happened when the internet started. It's going to change. But if you don't change, like if you never got a website, you're probably out of business, right? And I think this is going to be the same thing as if you don't change, it's going to be there. I wonder what it's going to do to some historically high gross margin businesses. I think, I think there's a real risk that it changes some of those businesses because it's an amazing driver of efficiency.
Yeah. I remember reading years and years ago, and I cannot tell you which economist it was, but this was an economist probably 100 years ago that predicted that by the end of the 20th century, we would be working a total of 4 to 8 hours a week. And that would be the average work week in the United States because, we would see such technological innovations. And I do think, right, by the time they made that prediction, it was essentially a 100-year span. We saw wild technological advances occur during the 20th century. Just, I mean, wild. But I'm not working 4 to 8 hours a week or 4 to 8 hours a week. I'm still working a full work week, and some would argue that the work weeks may have even gotten longer in some
Yeah,
professions.
and our output and our efficiency, like I would say, like just what I use, Claude and Chat GPT, I would say I got in throughput probably 20 hours a week and additional things I can accomplish. So
Right,
I think that I think there's probably a question over the longer term, maybe 10, 20 years, and what does that do? But I think in the near term, this is an incredible tool for us to be so much more efficient in what we do. And if you think about most of the stuff that it's automating, it's not the high value work that we do. It's the low value work. That's what AI today is automating for us.
right. Well, and that's, it's your point when you were talking about hiring developers and the utilization of AI. And essentially, if you have 3 developers, you utilize AI, it adds like, fourth one. And I was thinking about that because that's one of the areas, and I don't mean to pick out software developers, but that's one of the
Yeah,
areas
yeah.
that I've heard is that AI can be used really effectively to write kind of what, for lack of a better term, kind of the intro coding. It's not great at doing more sophisticated levels of coding, but if you already have some code, it can repeat it and help you build it out where a developer would have had to do it manually in years past. It can kind of already copy and do it. It's the fine tweaking that really needs the developer's experience or expertise on kind of the higher end stuff, if that makes sense.
It does, but I will say is if you know the questions to ask, like as a developer, it is because I'll tell you this is the true life. Venture capitalists already are seeing this. Is it used to be, hey, we invested $100 million. They built this software. It's got a proprietary moat that's very hard to duplicate. But what you're seeing is smaller companies with dramatically less capital be able to generate tremendous amounts of revenue. Like there's a company that I might do some stuff with and join, but in 3 years with 50 people, it's gone from it's an AI company, from 3 to 20 to $59 million in revenue. And I'll just give you one other example. There's another company that there's a thing called no code. I don't know if you heard of it, but like this is a lot of law firms, insurance companies have bought these systems that were kind of drag and drop to build applications.
Okay.
And it was easier because I didn't have to hire really sophisticated developers. But they're already starting to see that they're getting crosswinds because now those developers can actually build very sophisticated applications because they can just ask AI how to do the thing they didn't know how to do. And it gives it working code to do that exact thing. So, and that's a true life example of a company that was probably 60, 70 million in revenue that over the last couple of years has gone down to 30 million in revenue.
Yeah.
Because now it's AI's made that problem they were solving. It's hard to code these type of solutions, essentially go away slowly.
Right. Right. Well, Ken, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. I can at least tell you that I learned a lot and kind of opened my eyes and kind of the way that I think and kind of adjusted some of my thinking on some of these topics. So I greatly appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and our listeners. We greatly appreciate it.
No, Zach, I really appreciate it. And if there's anything, I'm a big believer in just kind of, do good things in the world. The world does good things to you. So if there's anything I could do for you or your listeners, or they're like, hey, we're trying to put together one of these working groups. Do you have any ideas on how we should get started? They could feel free to reach out. You can find me at kengavronovic.com, KenGavranovic.com, or just search for my name on LinkedIn. It's kind of unique, so you'll probably find me pretty quickly.
I was going to say I Googled you and it was not hard to find you very quickly.
Yeah, you can Google me too. All
Ken, I really appreciate it. Thanks again.
right, have a great day. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Reminger Report podcast on emerging technologies. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. For more insights, visit Reminger.com or connect with us on social media.